Welcome to the Blockchain Startup Show with Harrison Wright, a podcast dedicated to dauntless blockchain leaders building our new decentralized future. You'll hear stories, successes, trials, and tribulations as we channel into the lives of high-performing leaders in crypto and Web3. Whether you're currently a Web3 founder or leader, or you one day aspire to be, you'll gain crucial knowledge and insights to accelerate your learning curve, handle this industry's greatest challenges, and make the impact you've always dreamed of.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Blockchain Startup Show. I'll be your host, Harrison Wright. Pleasure to have you here today. Today, I'm very excited to welcome a special guest, Zach Fowler. Zach is currently Senior SDR for Rise, a hybrid crypto-to-fiat payroll platform. Most importantly, though, Zach is the voice to listen to when it comes to all things prospecting in Web3. If you're interested in prospecting and that area of go-to-market, you probably should be listening to Zach, especially on LinkedIn. Zach, welcome. Great to have you here.
No, great to be here, Harrison. And it's also, I think that's how we met. Just going on LinkedIn and expand the network. There's definitely a few different areas of prospecting. You can prospect clients, you can prospect in your network, and like I said, expand that network. And I was happy our paths crossed. And thanks for having me on the show.
Same here. It's a pleasure. This is a really random direction to take this conversation. And I promise not to derail us too much. But since you bring that up, I was just thinking this morning before we sat down, and it occurred to me that if you really think about it, you could make the argument that prospecting is the critical function of every business. And it doesn't matter if it's a B2B play or it's B2C. It just changes the nature of the prospecting. And I know that's not necessarily what we're here to talk about specifically today. But if you think about community building, it's kind of a weird light bulb moment. It just occurred to me, wait, community management and building is literally just B2C form of prospecting. It's about acquiring an audience. True. Yeah, it's a different mechanism for the same goal, but in a different way.
I mean, even like if you think about marketing, and you think about building out your marketing stack, or you're thinking about building your content team when you're on social media, when you're at conferences, when you're talking with your friends, everybody's kind of prospecting in some degree. They're thinking about their past, present, and future. Who do I know that could help me? Who do I need to meet that could help me in the future? And it kind of ends up going full circle. I mean, especially in Web3, there's people that you meet, in 2 weeks you're working with. There's people that you meet, and in 2 years that you start working with. And so there's the side of prospecting that is sales driven, and then there's the side of prospecting that is totally relationship building. And maybe it benefits you now, or maybe you're building out your pipeline for the next 3 to 5 years. Maybe one day I'm going to go into a product that I'm selling to recruiters, and I'm going to go hit up Harrison or something like that. You really never know where it's going to take you.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I'm thinking of mind. I can't remember who originally said this, but it's a popular quote in the sort of traditional sales world in Web 2, and that is that opening is the new closing. If you look at the old generations of salespeople, they were obsessed with closing, and it's actually kind of ridiculous if you think back on it. I don't know if this is maybe before your time or not, but the old school sales training that we used to sit through, 15, 20 years ago, they would tell you, they would give you these ridiculous closing techniques. Oh, well, if you buy it now, X, Y, Z would happen. And then there was a generation of sellers after that. And I think the first guy to popularize this was the author of Spin Selling, Neil Rackham. And spin selling is a lot more sophisticated than it sounds. It sounds like if you weren't familiar with the book, you'd think, oh, spin doctors. But spin selling actually is an acronym: situation, problem, implication, and need payoff. It's like a framework for discovery questioning. But he commissioned this large-scale study on sales behaviors, and he was the guy that first popularized the concept that actually closing techniques are much more harmful than helpful. The only reason that they ever got popularized is, one, in simple sales where you don't normally have salespeople involved anymore, you just go on Amazon. It's easier to make the salesperson go away by buying the thing than to say no. So they're kind of pressuring them into buying. You never see that person again, so it might be effective, but you burn the relationship in the process, which you would never do in our kind of environment. But also, it's kind of the recency effect. I can't remember what the psychological term is, but hey, you deploy the closing technique and they say yes, so you assume the closing technique is what got you the result. Actually, they would have bought anyway. Probably maybe even more likely if you didn't use the stupid closing technique, because you alienate them in the process. But that's another story. But I think this concept of opening is the new closing is really interesting, because if you look at the modern world, it's so much harder to get attention now than it ever used to be in any endeavor. And you look at the economy of any any organization, especially in crypto, there are whole crypto brands that run on attention. If you scratch under the surface, there's not always a lot of substance there, but just the fact that they have the attention buys them a lot of traction. And I think that, I don't know really where I'm going with this, but I wanted to float that out there as a topic of discussion.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I like Alex from Aussie a lot, and he's a big advocate that attention is the new oil. And if you definitely look at my approach on LinkedIn, I do source some leads to there. And when I say source leads to there, a lot of people think LinkedIn, it means that I'm going out and I'm in people's DMs and I'm constantly converting. And for our product especially, it's a lot about meeting buyers where they're at. We're a payroll product. It's a pain in the butt to go through and switch your payroll product. Nobody goes into your DMs and says, hey, your product's cool, I'm just going to completely change payroll for 50 people. Generally, they're already experiencing some type of pain. I just want to get their attention so that when they do feel that pain, I'm the person that they think to go to. And sometimes I meet them on LinkedIn, sometimes I meet them on email, and sometimes I'm meeting them through my social network. But LinkedIn especially, we've seen it where somebody comes inbound through the website and they say, hey, how'd you hear about Rise? I just saw a post. And so when you think about opening, it's, well, how many doors can I open? It used to just be, well, I'm just going to either sit around and wait for people to come inbound. I'm going to cold call them. But then especially in Web3, it's gotten difficult. Like you said, people's inboxes are flooded, people's DMs are flooded. So now it's getting creative and thinking, how can I open these doors without overly selling to people and just get their attention so that when the time is right, and if the time is right, maybe they convert quick, but if the time's not right, I have their attention and I open the door in a respectful way, in a non-salesy way, that I'm able to stick around for the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah,
and
it makes a ton of sense.
I was gonna say, sometimes it's hard though, especially when you're a salesperson. It's this dichotomy, right? You're balancing, I need to sell now, but I also don't want to constantly be burning over bridges and stepping toes because I want to be able to sell in 6, 12, 18 months. And even like today, I had somebody come inbound through the website where we thought the conversation went dead 3 months ago, but now they're back. And I think that speaks to just our overall approach to sales. Because like you said, it's not always the close.
Very much. What I'd be really curious about is the philosophy that you deploy now in your prospecting. Has that always been the case during your time in Web3, or have you had to change how you go about things quite dramatically over the last year or so?
Well, I'd say there's like two parts of that, because I've had to change stuff just simply because of like technical aspects, especially, I know me and you talk a lot about cold email in our DMs, and I've had to change the approach from a technical perspective, whether that's on scale, but even sometimes in just messaging, and realizing that sometimes the simple messaging with just a simple question with maybe 2 emails max gets the job done better than what people were able to do in the past, which was 8 to 20 point, sequences where they're cold calling them and then they're emailing them and then they're messaging them on LinkedIn. I'd say the overall prospecting for me, it hasn't changed a ton. And that's because of my product. You talk to some other like true BD people that are working for a DeFi protocol. Their prospecting is going to look a lot different than mine. Theirs is going to be a lot more network focus, going through Telegram, going through Twitter. Since I'm selling more to HR, operations, and founders, I find I have a lot better success still with traditional routes, which are just going to be LinkedIn and email. And I think that just speaks mostly to the nature of my product versus actually the industry that I'm selling into.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you touched on something quite important there, because I find, especially if someone is not overly, say you have a founder who's more on the technical side, and they're not overly familiar with go-to-market strategy, or even some experienced salespeople, I find it's quite tempting to come into a new environment and try to copy-paste a go-to-market approach from somewhere else without thinking from the ground up of what is the unique situation here, what is the end result we need to achieve, what is the optimal workflow for that, and how are we going to go about it. And I think you could take one approach that's very successful in one company and deploy it in another, and you'd hit a brick wall.
That's very true. I've actually thought about that a lot, because it's, sometimes it's cool to have a blueprint. It's cool to have the plays you can run, but even the plays that I'm running right now that are working for Rise, they weren't necessarily working 3 months ago. And a lot of that comes with brand recognition or even like we talked about before we were getting on this call, messaging. When I first started with Rise, I didn't call it a hybrid payroll platform. I called it a crypto payroll platform. Those elicit two very different responses. I could be prospecting the same people. I could be talking to the same person. But if I say crypto payroll and they think, oh, we only do it in fiat, it just was totally going over their head. Some people that I was even messaging and emailing 3 or 4 months ago, they've converted recently with my new messaging because it just clicks a little bit more and it goes, oh, that actually is interesting. I do want to check it out. And it's been a fun experiment for me to see that evolution evolve.
Definitely. And I think that use of the word experiment is quite telling. Something that I find is an often underrated benefit of traditional prospecting. I say traditional, maybe even cold calling, which I know I am a big fan of. It's not the most popular by most go-to-market advocates in Web3. However, what cold calling in particular, but all forms of one-to-one prospecting offer is that ability to get live feedback. And something interesting that I've noticed, I've recruited a lot of marketers over the years. I've consistently found that the marketers that have a sales background tend to be better at what they do. And I think it's because if you go straight into digital marketing and you've never worked in a one-to-one selling environment, you're isolated from that real-time feedback. Okay, so you inherit someone's giant email infrastructure and you write emails that get sent to 50,000 people, or you put something on the internet. You'll get some feedback, but most of the people are going to respond in their own way privately, and you're never going to see the response. Whereas if you pick up the phone, of course, you see in real time immediately what works. And somehow my thinking has evolved on this is it makes sense whenever you're testing something, a market message, get on the phone and test it live, iterate it, find what works. Then when you found the winning message, then you can scale it with digital and automation techniques and marketing.
That's very true. I mean, I think I started small, like with these subsects too, and it took a while to figure out some of the email stuff to get it like, okay, I'll get it like consistently going through. And for me, the feedback was data. It was like, what is our open rates looking like? What does our reply rates look like? What do our positive reply rates look like? But even like for me, getting on social media and seeing that, oh, when I do even just talk about the product in this way, my posts are performing better. There's something that's resonating there. I think I did a poll this week and same thing, or actually, no, I did kind of like a story again about that messaging, going through and experimenting with the messaging and seeing what resonates with people that way, and then being like, actually, just that does make sense to me. Or even going to a conference and people ask, hey, what do you do? How do you talk about your product? They go, wow, I haven't even thought about my payroll that way or getting compensated that way. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like when you get all this hype around AI-driven outreach. Oh, you can use AI to reach 100 times as many people. Well, fine, but a terrible message that you can send 100 times more of is still a terrible message. It's not going to get you results. Quite the opposite.
I got an AI message the other week, and they were selling their product. That was like an AI messaging tool, and they thought I still worked at the same job I worked at 3 years ago. I was like, hey, I don't think you're necessarily there with your go-to-market strategy yet. You might want to tweak that because this is totally not relevant to me, and there's no way that I would use your tool as a salesperson with this. And I've experimented with them. I think, like you said, it is good to experiment with all these tools. I've experimented with video tools, video messaging. Video is great. It can really resonate with people, but when you're going through and recording 100 videos, maybe it's not as efficient. I've experimented with the AI ones that change the first name. But still, one thing I've noticed in Web3 is people are, they're wary to click on things. So especially like sending them a video straight to their inbox doesn't always land. Case study is a little bit different for whatever reason. And I think context is where it really matters. But yeah, I don't think Web3 is there with videos. I mean, even if you look at a lot of even go-to-market strategies from a marketing perspective, videos are lacking. When you look at podcasts, like Twitter Spaces are very common, but when it comes to face-to-face video, I think we're really only now seeing a resurgence in it. With Bankless is pretty popular. Blockworks has Lightspeed, and they have their own podcast. But when you look at a lot of the other, I'd say any go-to-market strategies directly on the protocol level, they're living almost primarily on Twitter Spaces or product videos. There's not that gap of face-to-face interactions, really.
Yeah, that there's a lot of truth to that now that you mention it. Do you think that also presents an opportunity for people thinking a little differently?
I think so. I mean, I love doing videos whenever I get the chance. I mean, that's why we're doing this right now, even. And like I said, I've done a few other ones. But I think it's also hard. It's a big lift. It's a little bit different than what you see in like a lot of growth marketing skill sets for like where most people are probably hiring. And then even like on the agency level, most agencies are going to be focused more on the technical SEO side or, producing content. That video is a little bit of think of a foreign area, but also what type of video, what type of short form content is actually going to land with your audience, whether that your audience is developers or retails or other founders or even B2B.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can attest to this. I cannot tell you for the longest time how long I put off doing videos because I think a lot of people aren't comfortable being on video. Although it's
Mm-hmm.
different to be on a video call and to actually put your videos out there into the world, right? So I
Right.
held on to it for so long, and it was all for nothing because as you know I've been publishing short videos on LinkedIn for about 3 weeks now, so it's not long. As soon as that first video went out, blew up, got traction, and I was all my fears were for nothing, and it's been incredible. I mean, this is kind of crazy coming from a recruiter, I know, but I only started regularly posting on LinkedIn a few months ago, and I like to think I'm a very good writer. Quality posts, lot of time goes into them, but putting those videos, not only is it easier because I have a process where I can get these recordings out of an interview, which is streamlined, but it's absolutely blown up the amount of presence I get on LinkedIn. I'm getting about 12,000 impressions a week now, which to some people might not be a
Wow.
lot, but it's just exploded. So
With what the
there's clearly a
algorithm has
demand there right
done
now.
recently, that's very good. I mean, especially if you don't have 10,000 to 20,000 followers.
Yeah, it's been quite eye opening.
Videos are a lot of fun. I think the biggest thing, and I'm a big advocate of if you are a founder, um, I see this a lot in the B2B Web2 space, like especially the SaaS. A lot of people are overly focused on the content that their company page puts out. I'm a big advocate of like have your personal. I don't even like the word personal brand because a lot of it is your company's brand, but your company brand should speak through the people that work at the company because people buy people. You see a lot of like I see it very frequently where the founder is driving inbound leads through the content that they're posting on their personal page, whether that's videos, whether that's content, whether that's just their story, whether that's thought leadership. So I would say for founders watching this, and if you're doing founder-led sales, consider working with your marketing team to focus on your content, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is also a huge white space in Web3, at least for like the business development B2B side. If you're a retail product, you obviously need to be on Twitter. But a lot of like Web3 native protocols sleep on LinkedIn. There's just way less noise. Like it's pretty easy to get noticed by some pretty big names, or at least the people you want to get noticed by, as long as they're also on LinkedIn. I'd say that's the one caveat. There are some people go to their LinkedIn and they'll go, "Don't message me on here. Go to my Twitter account." But then there's others where they're pleasantly surprised by the activity on LinkedIn. So yeah, that's one thing I would say is from a company level, focus on some of the content for your personal page, even if it's about the company, which is still okay. That's what I do.
Yeah, I think that's a message that a lot of founders in the space really need to hear. I have a client I'm thinking of. I remember about 2 or 3 years ago, he said to me, he's a technical founder, and he was in this kind of exasperated tone. He said to me this one time, I feel like I'm just a salesman these days. It's all I ever do. I said, yes, that is your job as the founder. You are the salesperson for your team. Um, but before, I don't talk about this a lot, but I've been a recruiter for most of my career. But just before I started this company, I took a bit of a sidestep and I did B2B sales for a marketing agency in life science. So we used to work with sometimes big life science companies on content plans, but also sometimes smaller biotechs. And one of the one of the forever challenges we were having is, one of the things we used to sell were webinar packages back when webinars were cool. No one really does webinars anymore, but this was a few years ago. And one of the
I'm
biggest
going to one
challenges.
after this.
Are you?
I'm actually going to one. Yeah, it's for cold email deliverability.
Oh, nice. Keeping the tradition alive. I love it. Yeah, so we would, what we would do is sometimes we would have these little biotech companies, and we would produce the webinar for them, and we would get a speaker from the industry to talk about something academic for the scientific audience, and then promote it. But, the most powerful thing was getting the founder of the company to present the webinar, and they were so resistant to it. Same thing with technical founders. As scientists, they don't like the limelight. They want to hide away and do their scientific thing. But the people want to hear from the founder. That's what gives the personal investment. And we would inevitably find that if we could get them to agree to come and give those webinars and give those talks and be a presence, it would be really, really helpful. And I think that absolutely applies in crypto as well.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing too is like, and I always advocate, if you can do it yourself, do it yourself as much as you can. But ghostwriters, or even working, like I've seen some people, they work with VAs to like manage their LinkedIn DMs. Perception is powerful. Like you said, even if it's the perception that the founder is active in the Discord. Now, obviously there's a fine line between deceit and perception. That being said, I think there is something to be said about using it to your advantage when you can, and working it into your overall content strategy. I don't want to get too deep into it, obviously, with like who owns the account, when you're bringing on other people at the company. But some companies that I see work really well, they have a unified content strategy between like their head of sales, their founder, and then their company page. And they're all kind of saying the same thing, but slightly different, and maybe their own flair. And then they throw in some personal stuff. Because I know some people on LinkedIn are like, I don't want to talk about my personal life. And to a degree, I get it. But again, I go on LinkedIn to try to find the people that I want to work with. And I don't just want to work with people just because they have the right product at the right time. I also want to like that person and know a little bit about their life. That's more than just that makes them feel like more of a person than just a profile.
100%. When I look, I think not everyone is quite like me, but if I look back at the things that I buy in a B2B context, especially more personal things like coaching and consulting, by the time I contact that person, a lot of the time, I already kind of know that that's the thing I want to buy. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean they can't screw up the meeting and then I won't buy it, but there's a whole lot of groundwork that can be laid up front. And I think that works both ways. If you look at the old age of sales, say pre-LinkedIn, say 15, 20 years ago, and pre-Google reviews, you think about even restaurants, right? Before Google reviews, a lot of bad restaurants could survive a long time because you had no idea what you were walking into, especially if it was a tourist area. Now you look it up on Google reviews, the bad places don't survive. And I think that works with business development as well, because you had entire companies that thrived with shoddy delivery systems, shoddy operations, in all sorts of fields, but they had this heavy out, the Glengarry, Glen Ross, Boiler Room, Wolf of Wall Street kind of outbound sales process, and they would just churn and burn their customers, and they could do that for years. But you can't do that anymore, because not only is there Trustpilot and Glassdoor and all these sorts of things, but people will talk. It only takes one bad experience. Someone ran about it on LinkedIn or Twitter, and it's going to go and it's going to really, really hurt you. So I think it's a double-edged sword. The tools we have access to now and reach enables you to scale a great message in such a powerful way, and it enables bad things to happen much more readily as well. I mean, even a mistake like you hire the wrong person, they turn out to be unethical and do bad things. The downside risk of that now is almost unlimited compared to what it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago for you as a company.
No, it's very well said. It's very well scale, and that's where even like we could even bring it back to like the AI talk and all this. Scale can hurt you, even if you don't know what you're doing. Like cold email is another example. You try to scale it up too fast because you want to we live in this society of more is always better. It's not. It can turn around and bite you. Same thing with overhiring. What's the perception of the company when you go through and you don't scale your hiring effectively? Now you're laying off people, and now you read the headline, so and so lays off 30% of their workforce. I mean, I think Polygon was a good example of that recently. They had this this, I'd say, overall positive brand image. But after they went through the layoffs, there was a little bit of hesitancy there.
Yeah, and I think it's this might just be me speaking my own feelings out loud here, but I think I'm tapping into the zeitgeist here, where one side of this modern age is it's almost like we all live under the ever-present digital panopticon. Your entire life is under examination by the entire world all the time, and I think that adds a lot of pressure. You know, if I think back to when for the first half of my recruiting career, there was online, but your online was not really a channel. Your relationships were all one-to-one and over the phone. And when I remember there was a time where I used to leave the office. Well, it's been a long time since I've been in a physical office. I wouldn't see any emails until the next day. There was a very clear separation between this is work and this is life. But now it all blends into one. And you know, in both ways, some of my best friends are people I met through work. I've had people come to visit me. I cold called them for a job. They weren't right for the job, but we ended up having this long conversation, and then they became a friend, and we meet up from time to time. Something the new age offers, as well as its downsides.
I mean, I think, like, for example, like, I got two stories that makes me think of. One is, like, I got my job right now. Oh, and then there we go. We got some balloons going off. I didn't know who was going to do that.
It's like the what's that tool? Is it Zoom where you can press the celebration button?
I think it's like Google. I think it's a feature in Google now where you do like thumbs up.
Yeah, that's the one.
Certain things, but now, like, my job now at Rise, I'd submitted a few applications, but it turns out they didn't actually see them. Like, I went through Indeed, and I hadn't checked Indeed for months because it just we weren't getting any good candidates. I didn't know that at the time, so I was like, well, I want to work for this company. I'm going to cold call the CEO, and he happened to be at Consensus, and he's like, oh, hey, this is kind of catching me off guard, but I like it. Send your information over to the hiring manager. Sent him a video, and same thing. I wanted to get my face out there, but I also wanted to do something a little bit different. We ended up starting 2 weeks later. Then the other thing I think of, kind of like you said, you're friends with people that you've cold called. I use the analogy of when I'm like, if in a perfect world, how do I want to sell? I want to sell like my father-in-law, who is in construction, where when somebody, needs their fence done or needs the roof done, he's their guy. Sure, he's the guy that they go to for business, but he's also their guy because he's their friend and they know him. Whether it's a payroll product or outbound sales prospecting, I just hope to be your friend or at least an acquaintance enough that I'm the guy that you think of when you do need that. Which kind of goes back to where we started this conversation, was how do you even catch people's attention in the first place?
I don't know if you've ever read, I can't for the life of me remember what book this is from, but there's a story from one of the old school classical sales books that I always come back to. And this was back decades ago. This guy was in luxury car sales. Can't remember which brand, but he became the best-selling car rep in the entire company globally by orders of magnitude. What did he do? He's not like the normal car salespeople where you go in a dealership and he didn't do anything that most people would perceive as selling at all. What he did, everyone that came to visit him, he would take notes down and follow up with them and say they came to him and maybe they went and buy a Porsche instead. Well, he'd keep a note of when they bought the Porsche, and he would have a book of everyone he'd ever interacted with, and they had the service intervals. So say they bought the Porsche from his competitor. 3 months later or whenever it was, he'd call them up and say, hey, I just wanted to remind you that it's time for your service now. He would just be helpful and remind them of, hey, you need to get this done. I said, oh, thank you so much. Inevitably, it would take some time to kick in, but ultimately, all those people would feel such a loyalty to him, they would come back and next time they would buy from him instead. And it just grew and grew and grew. And I think that's such a great example of that in action.
No, that is a great example. I mean, I think we can even apply that to, it depends. It definitely depends on your product and depends on what your offer is. And Alex Ramosi talks about this a lot, but just make a free offer that's of value to somebody that is better than your competitor's paid product, and just give them that thing of value. And if you don't have that, you can even do it on a personal level where it's, hey, I remember so-and-so was talking about they were interested in DPIN projects. I come across an article, I come across a report, hey, thought you might find this interesting. And it's like, That's how you can get people's attention. That's how you can even get your prospects' attention. But it's totally has nothing to do with selling. Like you said in that example, even it has nothing to do with selling them a new car. You're simply just doing something that they find valuable, that stands out from the crowd. And I think that's kind of lost on people sometimes because we want to be so quick. We want the sale now. We don't want to wait 3 months to remind them and then wait another 6 months when they're ready to sell. We want to sell them right now, where it's like, well, what happens if you connect with somebody on LinkedIn, wait a month, they say they mention a post that they're hiring for somebody, say, hey, go talk to this person, or hey, anybody know any good outbound sales tools? Yeah, go check this one out. 6 more months goes by. Hey, I actually need that thing. Well, he helped me in the past. Maybe he can help me here too. That's how I like to sell. That's my personal style, and it's helped not only just on a professional like networking level, but even like I said in the actual sales process is genuinely being able, wanting to help and provide that value.
I think it's huge. And I think you touched on something else inadvertently there that I think is a really critical distinction, which is that oftentimes I think people conflate prospecting and selling, but they're not the same thing at all. Prospecting is opening conversations. It precedes selling. It's a requirement to have the opportunity to sell, but it's not the same thing. And as you know, I'm a proponent of cold calling. I don't do any selling on cold calls. I'm prospecting. Mm-hmm. If I'm prospecting prospective clients, then I want to find out, do they have the problems that I can solve, and are they aware of those problems, and do they consider those problems to be a priority? That's what I want to find out. If that's the case, then there's the opportunity for a further conversation. And I apply the same philosophy when we're recruiting. I don't call somebody up and tell them, hey, let me tell you about this amazing job. Again, I want to find out, how's their career going? Do they have any problems that I can potentially solve? Let's get into a conversation about that. If there's any selling, it comes much later. And I think that's a critical distinction for people too.
Dude, you said that very well. And so it's like, that's like, I think we could touch on, like, when you are prospecting, like, what is the flow? Even like you said, you're more of a proponent of cold calling. I'm a proponent. I'm on a cold email kick right now. And I think we even talked about it like 3 or 4 months ago. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. I was telling you, I was like, I want to figure this out. Like, I have the tools. Now I'm going to figure out how to get the people to convert. One thing that shifted for me was looking at the people that I'm emailing as like a private ad network. Okay, so I don't want to feel like them selling, but if they were to see an offer, like what would start to click with them? And for me, it was a simple thing of, okay, these are the people I'm prospecting. I think they might have the problem, but what I'm going to say in the email is, I observed this. Maybe I observed you in the blockchain space, and then saying like, I thought this might be true. I thought you worked with I thought you might work with contractors, given of what I can observe about your company. This is how we help companies that work with contractors. And then throw a screenshot up that's something that just is super simple that explains what we do. Interested in learning more? If not, no worries. And I think I sent them like 2 more emails, same thing, high level stuff. This is what I see. You might be experiencing this. Hey, here's a case study. It might be worth checking out if you're like these people. See you later. Not super hard selling, not just, hey, is this somewhere in the realm of anything that would interest you? And so in a way, I guess you would even say that, like, when I'm just cold emailing, I'm just prospecting to find those people that are at the right place at the right time and are interested. Even when you're talking, and so it's like, how do you do that? Well, you need to know what platforms you can go to get data. You need to understand like what your client looks like. What keywords could you use to find them? So many people get caught up with, I'm just going to sell to blockchain companies. Well, okay, there's a lot of different blockchain companies. What size do you sell to them? What keywords could be specific? For example, I don't really care about people that are building on Solana right now because we're EVM compatible. So how are you going to go and find those different people? Just even knowing what those keywords are, and knowing how to narrow down your search smaller and smaller and smaller. There's people that are in countries that we can't work with. If they're in Russia, don't want to work with them. I need to get those out of my prospecting list so I'm not wasting time. So many times people get a massive prospecting list, like, oh, I have this many people. And it's like, well, how are you going to break that down? How are you going to parcel it out? And then, like you said, too, the other part of prospecting is sometimes for me, I'm on LinkedIn. I see this person. I'm just going to send them a connection request. I'm not going to message them. I'm not going to put anything in there. But if I see their post, I'm going to comment on their post. I'm going to engage with them like a human. That's just prospecting right there for me, because I'm just trying to get their attention somehow.
I think that's
I don't know if that
exactly
all
right.
makes sense. I kind of went on two different
Yeah.
routes there, and they might have like blended a little bit. But I mean, like I said, and everything's really prospecting at the end of the day.
Yeah, it is. And I think if I look back to, if I compare prospecting 10 or 15 years ago with prospecting now, I think two of the major differences, apart from the superficial ones, channels and tools, and 15 years ago, everything was the phone, at least in a B2B context. It's not like that now. But there's two things. One is the overwhelmingly increased volume of noise now means that relevance needs to be higher than ever. The old school approach, when I started, literally, my first job, my boss just gave me the industry magazine. Hey, go to the index at the back, start calling the companies from A to Z. That's what you did. And the idea was, let's say the total market size had 1,000 people in it, for argument's sake. We would know that, really only 100 of those would be prospective good fit clients for us, and we'd probably end up working with about 30 of them. And the challenge was to dial through the 1,000 people and, like a detective game, figure out, to narrow down in on who those 100 companies were and then focus on them. Because there was nothing interesting you to find out publicly to determine if they were good. You had to talk to them. But back then, 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 people would answer the phone when you called them, and it was normal. It was considered rude not to answer the phone if you were free. Can you imagine that now? So you would progressively profile these companies over time. You might, hey, catch this guy. You would build a relationship with them. Hey, call me back in 2 months. Every time you get another key piece of information that would determine, do we follow up with this person or do we eliminate them? Today, you don't get that kind of leeway with most people. But there are so many things you can now do to determine if that company is an ideal fit or not without ever speaking to anybody. And I think this might be an interesting segue in, you mentioned about perceiving things about companies, signal-based prospecting. I've been looking at recently, I was speaking to, is it Arnaud, the guy at June? He made this big post about giving people meetings about June, the analytics platform. So I thought, I'm curious about that. Because what I did set up initially was things like Crunchbase alerts and Masari. You know what? Those signals are great, but I'm sure every time a project raises funding, they get 100 different emails from, hey, I saw you just raised funding. Congratulations. It's played out. So what I was thinking of, and what it was really helpful talking to the guys at June about, was I wonder if there are on-chain signals I can pick up on that's going to predict if someone's going to be hiring in the next 1 to 3 months, but something else that nobody else has picked up on yet, which I could also use as a perceptive thing in outreach. So I don't really know if I have a conclusion from this, but I wanted to open the floor to talk about signal-based prospecting because I think that's so interesting now.
That's an interesting conversation, and because I also thought about the same thing. Fundraising is probably like the biggest one next to like when they're hiring things, but I think what it all comes back to is signals. And like same thing, you can go to Apollo and you can set up a signal for people that are searching for a global payroll platform. How accurate is it? To be honest, I haven't seen like enough of a difference for when I add those people into sequence versus the non people that don't have a signal into sequence. I haven't seen a big enough of a difference to actually draw a conclusion like that is a true signal. Now, like I said, that's a signal that they're probably telling me because they are, there's cookies on their websites and they're finding, whatever search terms they've been putting into their Google for that specific domain. And that's how the cycle goes. I think what it comes down to doing signal-based selling, it comes back to how well do you know your product and how well do you know the pain point that your product is solving. The pain point that my product's solving is just, I haven't found a great signal. So signal-based selling is not super relevant to me. Sure, I can go through when people are hiring, but generally when people are hiring, they already have a payroll platform. When you hire more people, you don't want to make changes to your payroll platform. On the other side, I've also seen that when companies are too small, they don't really care about their payroll platform because they care about scaling and growing their company. So there is this very fine sweet spot. But the pain that we solve for really well is, okay, you have people in a certain country that want stablecoins and you have fiat, or on the other side, you're a crypto protocol and you have most of your funds on chain and your people want fiat. So you have two options. You can either do both and work in two different systems, and that's always fun. On one of them, maybe you have Gusto or Deal, and then the other side, you're going and doing wallet to wallet. Or on the other side, you're doing wallet to wallet and you're streaming. But at some point, there's going to be some subset of your employees that just aren't happy. we bridge the gap. For me, it's knowing, okay, I don't need to necessarily know a signal, but if I can communicate what the pain that you're experiencing in maybe 1 to 2 sentences that can just catch your attention and you go that I'm interested in learning more, that's been much more effective for me based off of my product than going based off of any signals. Maybe there is going to be a signal one day. I've tried a few signal based selling, and again, the differences are, the only one that like kind of works has been when somebody is going into a new, like they're the first HR hire, because they're probably like in an evaluation phase right now. But that's such a small subsect of my market, and it's just hasn't been super fruitful to just only focus on that. That being said, if you're selling like a technical product, APIs, like you could probably find some on-chain metrics like, okay, are they starting to deploy smart contracts? What smart contracts are they deploying? Okay, I'm seeing that they're deploying these smart contracts. And again, stick with me because I don't have a concrete example, but you can actually go and say, now that they're deploying these contracts, if we have this, like maybe our repository, maybe our API would be helpful. So you could actually track when a certain type of contract is deployed. That could be a great signal for you to go based off of. Maybe if you're selling like an NFT marketplace, for an example, if somebody goes through and they're minting their project, that might be a good trigger for you to reach out and say, hey, we actually allow a marketplace to live like natively in your app, so you don't have to go use OpenSea. So I think signal based can be a great tool, but you're not going to know what signals to look for if you don't know your product and know the pain that your product solves very intimately.
Yeah, I think I couldn't have said it better myself. I think the only thing I'd add to that is, so I don't know if you get these emails. I get so many cold emails, usually terrible ones, honestly. Very, very few that are good. Probably because I have founder in my job title. But
you're going into all the search filters.
yeah. Well, sometimes what I see is most people that are using signal-based prospecting, they pick up on, and I actually can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I know I've gotten emails where, they're quite perceptive about something that they noticed. But then what they then put in an email is completely irrelevant to the signal they picked up on. Exactly. Hey, I saw you were X. Hey, let me tell you about our product. It's like they're just putting it there for the sake of it. They're not drawing an inference from signal. So I think tools can be dangerous because, what's the saying? A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And a little bit of a segue, but I'm thinking of something here. Anyone listening that is a bit of an Austrian economics fan or Austrian adjacent economics, which should be a lot of people because we're in crypto. There was an old quote by, I think, Frederick Bastiat, and he was talking about what is seen and what is unseen, and he was talking about the fallacies in economics where people overfocus on the things that they can overtly measure, and they ignore the things that they can't see, the second and third order consequences. And so I think one way that really applies here, if we talk about scale and messaging, is when you send your thousands of cold emails out and you get one person that comes back and say, hey, I'm interested, that sounds great. What you're not seeing is the impact of the other 999 emails. And I think back to a company I worked for about 10 years ago. I had this exact beef with them. This was still when most people did things by phone, and they had a KPI in the company. Every day you had to send out a mail shot. What they term, it's just a mass email pulled from the database. We had people tagged, so you had to send a mail shot to 1,000 people, a 1,000 people group about a job that was on. You had to send a mail shot to 1,000 prospective clients about basically they would anonymize someone's resume, which I personally am not a fan of that approach at all, but that's another topic entirely. But anyway, they swore by this because they generated their entire business through this mail shot process. They would get inquiries on one side, they would get inquiries on the other, they put it all together, and that's how they built their engine. But I didn't I refused to send those mail shots, and I just made calls. And they were laughing. Well, why wouldn't you do that? And I said, well, I would have my clients, and I was doing oil and gas recruiting at the time, get spammed by someone else's SAP, the ERP system candidates. Mm-hmm. And it would happen quite a lot. And it turned out that my key client, I had to email them from my Gmail account because our domain had been blocked for being spammed so much. And I would occasionally speak to people. Oh, that company, yeah, I'd never worked with those guys. Not after the stupid emails. So that what the seen effect was, hey, we get clients from this. The unseen effect was all the reputational damage they were doing in the background. And I don't think people think about that enough.
No, that's very true. Like I said, Twitter DMs, LinkedIn DMs, they can definitely like have that perception, and I think like it's good, especially like as a salesperson, to like go through and experiment. But there's a fine line, you know, between one, your time, how much time are you going to take experimenting, but two, like I said, what is the unseen consequences of when that person isn't responding? I think email threshold is a little bit higher because my theory is most of the time, at least nowadays, when people don't respond, it's not because your messaging wasn't good. It's just because their inboxes are flooded and it just wasn't like you didn't have a good enough subject line. There's very rare times where it's like they're actually reading every single one of my email and they're just bad. I think the more what I experience more often than not is it's probably not even getting read, even if my open rate is at 60% or something like that. Because think about how many times you click an email, skim the first line, and then you just delete it because it's didn't get you right then. Which is going back to what works for me right now is I think having some sort of big visual in there to kind of like catch their attention first, and then they probably go back and read it. Has worked well, but that is interesting. And I think, like I said, social media especially, I hear a lot of people, they want to do Twitter DMs, and Twitter DMs work if you're approaching it on the human level. You know, it has to really speak to their pain point, it has to really speak to what they're experiencing. But most of my successful DMs like normally start with just a normal conversation.
Yeah, I think the litmus test for me is when I get outreach from people, and even if I'm not interested at that moment, does it leave me with a positive association with that person? And if it does, then they're on the right track, because it's very rarely you're going to hit someone at one time. It's going to be everything's perfect, and they're going to buy into the relationship right now. But it's what does the sustained cadence over time accomplish? And I try to mirror that as well.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, Zach, this has been awesome. My last question for you is, for any founders that are listening to this that are thinking about their go-to-market strategy, whether building one from scratch or optimizing one that isn't working, and this is going to be quite a difficult question to answer, but any key pieces of advice you would have?
I'd say the first one is don't get too caught up. Let's say I'll put the disclaimer is depending on your product. Like I've said a lot, but depending on your product, don't discount somebody that's just coming from Web 2. I see a lot of times, and I've had a lot of conversations where it's like, hey, you just needed more experience, or you just needed to have a bigger Rolodex. And I think depending on the product, depending on whether it's more of a sales versus true business development partnership role, a Rolodex may be extremely helpful. But at some point, that Rolodex is going to get tapped out. So how well can that person actually that person that you're looking to hire, how well can they actually create relationships that weren't there, whether that's a sales relationship, whether that's a business development, whether that's a partnership relationship. But I'd say too is don't sleep on the traditional like cold email channel for especially like some B2B, even B2C is hard, but B2B products especially. Just remember that people don't want to hear about your product. They want to solve their problems. Because I even made the same mistake where it's like I thought the product was so cool that I thought I needed to talk about the product a lot, where really all I needed to do was just poke on that problem, and they go, oh wait, you can actually solve that and your product solves that? Great, let's talk more. And then I'd say the biggest one is just start posting on LinkedIn and Twitter. I say LinkedIn more than Twitter because Twitter, you're fighting with a lot of retail and you're fighting through a lot of other noise. I'd say Twitter is really good to start posting on if you want to start to building like a persona within the crypto industry itself. There's still a lot of noise, but don't sleep on LinkedIn. Really, like, give it a solid 3 to 6 months. Kind of like we were talking about, that there's a lot of unseen consequences to maybe bad messaging and bad like cold email practices. There's a lot of unseen a lot of people will see your LinkedIn and see your activity that you didn't know were seeing them. You're not going to be able to track it. You won't know it until maybe 3 months they come back and start talking with you. But that's probably one of the best things that I could do for not only my sales career, but my personal career, is just get out there so people can know who I am on LinkedIn.
I think all of those pieces of advice are absolutely sage. I will attest to that about LinkedIn. What I find really interesting is it's been about 3 to 6 months for me now. I've been consistently active on posting on LinkedIn. I will get messages from people, or people will book calls through the website, and I'll reference things I've posted on LinkedIn. The people that actually take action and the people that engage with the posts are usually not the same people, which is really interesting.
100%.
So, and it's great for testing messaging as well, because you can see what gets traction, and I'll use that elsewhere. Last thing I wanted to comment on that you brought up is putting my recruiter hat on now. When you say about don't discount people from Web 2, I think that's absolutely nail on the head. I think in any kind of BD sales hiring, people really overvalue domain expertise and undervalue process and systems. It's not to say that domain expertise and a Rolodex isn't important. It can help, but it's an accelerant. And I find a lot of people, earlier in my career, I pretty much exclusively hired salespeople, so I went through this a lot. They'll hire someone for their Rolodex, but the Rolodex is all they have. So the person burns through their Rolodex. It's not as, they can't bring as many of those people across as maybe you would think they would, and then they have nothing else left to offer. Whereas if you have someone with zero domain expertise but the right skills, there's a disadvantage there, and that they're going to take time to get up to speed. So maybe you can't afford that, but once they're up to speed, they're going to be able to bring their abilities and systems and processes and make it successful. So ideally, you have some combination of both in most cases, but I think that's an extremely valid point, and I'm glad you made it.
I think a lot of times the founder brings the Rolodex, the VCs bring the Rolodex. Maybe your first true sales hire, but anybody after that, like, give them a shot.
Amen to that. Well, Zach, thank you so much for coming. I think this has been an absolutely awesome conversation. I say that I hope the listeners will agree, because that's the litmus test. But thank you. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
No, likewise, Harrison. It's always good to chat.
Same. If someone wants to get in touch with you, this is kind of an obvious answer, but how can someone best get in touch with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's going to be the best. I'm on it every day. Just shoot me a connection request. I rarely shoot them down, and just shoot me a DM. And to be honest, I'll probably DM you first if you send me a connection request. But yeah, that's probably the best way. I'm on Twitter too, but Twitter's definitely more like my personal degen-y stuff. Like, I still say that I work for Rise, but it's like, it's an NFT profile, and LinkedIn's probably the best spot.
Awesome. Well, if you want to get hold of Zach, connect with him on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and see you again very soon.
Great.
Bye for now.
See you guys.